Welcome to the 2024 Election Watch podcast series. I'm your host, Whitney Pfeifer. This podcast series, an effort under the Global LGBTQI+ Inclusive Democracy and Empowerment Initiative, aims to analyze key elections in what is being deemed the mega year of elections, in which 64 countries and the European Union will host an election. The stakes are high due to the global rise of authoritarianism and a consolidated and powerful anti-rights movement. Today's episode will dive into the political landscape of elections in Georgia, Romania, and Turkey, and the implications of these elections for LGBTIQ people, as well as how LGBTIQ people are engaging in these political moments. We're honored today to have with us Mariam, co-director of Tbilisi Pride in Georgia, Vlad, director of MozaiQ in Romania, and Özgür, executive director of ÜniKuir in Turkey. Welcome and thank you for joining us today. The first question is to all of you. Please introduce yourselves and your organizations and share one word about how the LGBTIQ movement is feeling about the upcoming elections in Georgia and Romania, and for Özgür, how the movement is feeling about the recent local elections in Turkey. Mariam, I'll start with you.
Hello, my name is Mariam. I'm co-director of Tbilisi Pride, Europe's easternmost pride, which is a relentless LGBTQI organization. And we have managed so far to mobilize thousands of queer community members, their parents, and public figures. And our main idea is to achieve equality through visibility. Unfortunately, we are struggling now. We are in difficult times because LGBTQI community was chosen as a main scapegoat for the politicians during the pre-election period. And I would say that the community feels quite anxious in these difficult times, but we also try to go through these difficult times together and become more resilient.
Thank you, Mariam. Vlad, how is the community feeling in Romania?
Hello, I'm Vlad from MozaiQ LGBT Association in Romania, one of the leading LGBT organizations in the country. We focus on empowering LGBTI people everywhere in Romania, not only in the capital, Bucharest, and we do a lot of advocacy work as well in order to promote the interests of our community. For Romania, the year 2024 is a super electoral year in the sense that we will have all rounds of elections, specifically 5 rounds. We will have local elections, we will have elections for the European Parliament, we will have elections for president, and also parliamentary elections towards the end of the year. For the LGBTI community in Romania, every season of elections is always worrisome and in many regards saddening, because we're talking about political class and political elites in Romania, which mostly group around conservative values. And there is even a talk about launching a referendum to ban gay marriages in the constitution, which would add another elements to this election year. All the mainstream parties, the major mainstream parties, both left and right, have exhibited conservative values and do not support the legalization of civil unions, for example. And moreover, we have an extreme right-wing party, which is polling second already. So we are expecting an extremely difficult year in which the topic of LGBTI rights will be a main topic of election infighting, but also will make us a target for hate speech coming from politicians. However, we as a community and we at MozaiQ, we are really trying to find those opportunities in order to promote our agenda and to engage with stakeholders, to put on the agenda the topic of legalization of same-sex couples in the form of civil unions, especially given the fact that recently Romania has a final judgment from the European Court of Human Rights in which the court says that Romania has to recognize gay couples. So we are both saddened, worried. At the same time, we are trying to find all sorts of ways in which to identify the opportunities that might arise for us.
Thank you, Vlad. I was unaware of this referendum, so interested to hear a little bit more about how that goes. And Özgür from Turkey, the recent local elections.
Hello everyone, I am Özgür Gür, the Executive Director of ÜniKuir, which is basically the combination of two words, University Queer. So it means that we are the Youth LGBT Association in Turkey, and we are really proud to say that we are working with these amazing 35 LGBT student communities, not just in the metropolitan cities, all over the country. And when we ask how we feel about the local elections, I would say frustrated, but still hopeful. As you might know, the main opposition won the majority for the first time in 30 years. But I would like to give an example of the municipalities they won, and which will be the Beyoğlu in Istanbul, where the Gezi Park is located. So it's a really symbolic place also for the queer community in Istanbul. And at the same time, in one of the main streets of Istiklal, the people were celebrating the winning of this municipality. But again, in during the same hours, in the back streets, the police were attacking the LGBT activists. They were detaining the LGBT activists because they were defending their right to live in those neighborhoods. So I would say, yeah, of course, it has been going a challenge for us after all of these elections, which all of them were based in anti-LGBTI hatred campaigns, but still, seeing that could be a change after 25 years, the community still holds some hopeful.
Thank you for that. So definitely a mixed bag of emotions across the board as it relates to upcoming and recent elections. Before we go into country-specific questions, can you each describe the democratic space in your respective countries? Have you witnessed a democratic backsliding? And if so, has it impacted the LGBTIQ movement? We'll start with Oscar first in Turkey.
Just a little bit story of the Turkish civil society. I believe in the early years of AKP, and I'm talking about 20 years ago, we had this EU accession process. And there, civil society could find a place to furnish. And then what happened is Erdogan wanted to hold the power. So we didn't have any presidency in the past. Now we have it because Erdogan wanted more power. And for him to stay in his position, he had to create these polarized groups in Turkey. Now we have a polarized country. And for that, he needs enemies. He fighted with a lot of groups in civil society. And then now the LGBTI community is this new enemy for them. So that's why I believe we are witnessing the backsliding in all of our rights, not just in LGBTI community, but the LGBTI community is suffering the most because they are the new enemy. We are the new enemy.
Thank you, Oscar. And yeah, it obviously the rollback on rights has implications across the board, not just for LGBTQI+, but often these are the communities that face the harshest restrictions. Vlad, how about in Romania?
Yes, so when it comes to democracy, Romania is still a developing democracy despite it being part of the European Union. And there is a lot of shrinking spaces when it comes to democratic values and respecting minority rights. For example, in Romania, we have a strong anti-gender movement, which really puts on the public agenda anti-gender, anti-LGBT, anti-reproductive rights for women type of rhetoric, which is being supported by all sorts of actors from American right-wing actors like Alliance Defending Freedom, Liberty Council, conservative foundations, which have expanded their activities everywhere in the world. but also a lot of fake news, disinformation campaigns, which are coming from Russia and which are being used as tools within the political process. Moreover, there's attacks on NGOs and non-governmental organizations who are being pictured as foreign agents who are trying to change the fabric of society and attack so-called traditional values. Then there's issues related to freedom of assembly. And for example, in smaller cities outside of Bucharest, it's always a hassle and it's difficult for pride events to happen and get the approval from local authorities. Then we're talking about a lot of judgments by the European Court of Human Rights against Romania when it comes to legal gender recognition for trans people, when it comes to freedom of assembly for LGBTI groups, when it comes to recognition of same-sex couples, and so on. And this comes in the context of a grand coalition in which the main left and right political parties have joined hands and they are now ruling the country. And they are basically colonizing a lot of the institutions that were independent in Romania before. For example, the Constitutional Court of Romania, which now is filled with loyalists of these political parties. A lot of the institutions such as the National Equality Body, the Ombudsman, which is the people's lawyer, and so on. And all this comes in the context of a lack of resources for civil society to keep alive, to react, to monitor, to constantly look up for all sorts of bills that are being proposed in the parliament, also in terms of environment, also in terms of urban development, and so on. So there is a wide range of issues which do stem from this legacy of communism in Romania, but also the way the democratic transition happened in Romania, and more recently, this sort of grand coalition which exists in Romania, in which these political parties are trying to basically take over all of the institutions that are still independent in the state.
Thank you, Vlad. I think we'll talk a little bit more about how you're seeing other anti-gender narratives seep in from other parts of the region. So interested to hear a little bit more about that later on. Mariami, the democratic context in Georgia.
Similarly to Romania, actually, Georgia is also a developing democracy. We've never been like a fully democratic country. And we are also situated in a very difficult geopolitical context, with Russia being our neighbor, with Azerbaijan, Turkey, Armenia. And we also understand that there are the worst situations in some countries. There are better, but we always should compare to ourselves. And this is the sad part about Georgia. For years, we had slow progress, but it was still a progress. But what we are seeing now, especially during the last 3 years, is a very clear democratic backsliding, and there is a wide consensus about this. Even though we received the candidate status just recently to European Union, we see that the government is not implementing very key and important reforms, for example, against oligarchy, against corruption. We still have the huge problem when we call it one-party rule, because all branches of government, legislative, the court, the parliament, the ombudsperson's office, everything except the president is captured by one party, the ruling party, and also the president is elected now, but from next year it will be appointed by the majority, by the ruling party, and also we will lose this institution. And unfortunately, the attacks on civil society and non-governmental sector, this has been a huge problem. Last year, maybe all of you heard, we had mass protests in Tbilisi because the government was trying to adopt so-called foreign influence agent bill, very similar to Russian style legislation. And the people, the civil society, we did not allow to do this. And we forced the government to drop this bill, and it was a huge success. But what we see, yesterday, the government reintroduced this foreign influence agent bill, and now everyone is so angry and so upset about this. But it's important, and it's very unfortunate that the democracy backsliding is falling on LGBTQI people a lot. LGBTQI movement is targeted, and we are being scapegoated, as I mentioned. And what we see that during the last 2-3 years, the homophobic, very clear anti-LGBTQI rhetoric has hugely increased. It has been translated into violent physical attacks on Tbilisi Pride events like festivals or gatherings, even like private events were attacked, and we were evacuated several times. But it's really worrying that it did not stop on political homophobia, but we are seeing the huge wave of institutional homophobia, by which I mean removing gender identity, sexual orientation, and any LGBTQI related issues from all strategic documents, from national policy documents. We are disappearing. And the government, the state is turning their backs on us. And finally, we saw that Georgian Dream, the ruling party, a few weeks ago initiated so-called anti-LGBT propaganda bill, which is Hungarian Russian-style legislation with very severe restrictions, forbidding any medical intervention for grown-up people to change or confirm their sex, or limiting peaceful assembly, freedom of expression, controlling publishing houses, so on and so forth. Every kind of regulation, homophobic approach we've seen in the world is like brought together in one bill, and it's super difficult and challenging times for LGBTQI people right now. But we are trying to work with civil society, with other partners, other stakeholders to somehow counter this legislation, and it's even like change into the constitution. This is the constitutional law and constitutional level, which is extremely worrying. But we really hope that opposition will not vote for this legislation, and it won't be successful, unlike for an influence agent bill, which might be passed by the ruling party this time because they only need 76 votes. So I won't get into the details, but we see that democracy backsliding is real, even though we got the EU candidacy. And the government very much talks about how that they want to become the part of EU, but on their terms and with dignity, and that they want the other Europe, meaning the Hungarian Europe. And it's really worrying to see what path is Georgia going down. Thank you.
Thank you, Mariami. I think these anti-propaganda laws are a slippery slope because they often make it legal to restrict people's fundamental freedoms of assembly, of speech, of association. And although it may feel like it's only for just LGBTIQ organizations and communities, it's often a way to then start attacking other people's fundamental freedoms. So we'll be curious to talk a little bit more about that later in the episode. So I'm going to go to some specific questions for each of our speakers related to their respective countries. And I'll start with Vlad. According to the Freedom in the World report by Freedom House, Romania ranks extremely high, both in political rights and civil liberties. The country has also been applauded for its fair and free elections and regular rotation of power. What's your reflection on these data points? And do these reflect on your reality as a movement leader and the reality of the civil and political rights of LGBTIQ individuals in Romania?
Yes, so Romania decriminalized homosexuality in 2001, extremely late. It was one of the last countries in Europe to do so. And this has an effect, a long-term effect on the community, and especially on political attitudes towards the community. And despite the rotation of power, and despite the fact that there are elections that do happen regularly, we're not seeing necessarily a political will that is being galvanized towards supporting LGBTI rights. And throughout these past 20 years since decriminalization, there were very few points of access and types of dialogues that really existed with the state and really transformed into realities for our community. For example, there's been a wide range of bills proposed to the parliament to legalize civil unions, to recognize same-sex couples. Nevertheless, none of them picked up a lot of steam when it comes to political support. Moreover, despite this sort of transition to power, what we're seeing is the consolidation of two major parties, one left-wing party and one right-wing party, and besides them, and both of them have conservative type of views, we have now an extreme right-wing party which is polling around 20% in the polls for the European Parliament, for example. Of course, this is part of a larger trend which happens within the European Union, and we will see now the European elections on June 9th. We will see probably that extreme right-wing parties in Germany, in Italy, in France, and here we go in Romania as well, will have incredibly high scores, which affects, of course, the political context and environment for LGBTI people. Moreover, what we have seen throughout the years is that this sort of high rate of changes within the government, it actually does not allow us to plan ahead long term. The friends that we make within the parliament, in 4 years, they're gone, and our work is like Sisyphus work, in which we have to start all over again. We start negotiating with other stakeholders, with other players that might be on our side, and in this high rotation of power actually does not provide stability from our point of view, and does not provide predictability and feasibility. And this is extremely important. Moreover, what we're seeing more recently is a lowering of commitment towards human rights. Right now, in the Romanian parliament, there's less than 20% women, and the lists for the upcoming elections have even less women on them. Of course, we can't even talk about out LGBTI people being on the list, Roma people as well, which are discriminated in Romania. So to be honest, the topic of human rights and the representation of our groups, the solidarity that we have within our movements, is not reflected within the political composition of the parliament, of local councils, and so on, which is, of course, adds to this the corruption that still exists in Romania, which affects and skews the political process, and results oftentimes in lack of rights for us, not only LGBTI people. Of course, LGBTI people do not have rights in Romania. Romania ranks second to last in European Union when it comes to ILGA Europe Rainbow Map, which ranks countries all over Europe based on recognition of LGBTI rights. So there's a long road ahead for Romania.
Thanks, Vlad. I think this correlation between Freedom House's report and ILGA Europe's report shows a very interesting kind of juxtaposition about how these indices probably should speak a little bit more to each other, and how, Romania may rank high on freedom, but only for apparently for only certain communities. So thanks for your insight on that. Mariami, we'll jump over to Georgia. You spoke about this uptick in anti-LGBTIQ rhetoric and the unfortunate physical violence towards the movement, and as well as how this is playing into Georgia Dream's strategy to win and stay in power come October 2024 during the parliamentary elections. Can you dive into this correlation a little bit more, and how the movement is seeing LGBTIQ rights being utilized as an issue to galvanize votes?
Thank you for the question. Of course, the alignment of actions with Georgian Dream strategy for the October 2024 parliamentary elections is indeed notable. It appears that the party sees leveraging LGBTQI rights as a potential tool to secure voter support to please the ultra-conservative part of the Georgian society. And the LGBTQI movement perceives this tactic as, of course, as a calculated effort to galvanize votes by appealing to the up-mentioned segment of the electorate. And of course, it is very unacceptable how we are instrumentalized and how we are used in this dirty political game. But also, it is important that in Georgia, the homophobic rhetoric, the anti-LGBT political discourse has very much anti-Western underlinings. Like it has always, when there is talk about LGBTQI issues by politicians, by the ruling party, there maybe unlike Central Europe, in some countries, in the UK, for example, where there is a debate on LGBTQI or trans issues, here the context and the narrative is very anti-Western and making the point that the US, the European Union, that they are imposing so-called LGBT propaganda on Georgia. And this is very much used to plant the disinformation and anti-Western narratives. For example, one of the most common disinformation narrative in Georgia is that European Union will require Georgia legalize gay marriage if we move on this path to joining the EU and many other. And it's so difficult to oppose this kind of narratives and campaigns because there is a huge money, huge administrative resources and everything on the side of the government and the far-right groups led by millionaire businessmen and the Orthodox Church in Georgia, which is the dominant religious organization in the country with 80% of Georgians belonging to this church. And also the Orthodox Church is one of the main stakeholders who is opposing the equality and human rights for LGBTQI, right? And they were one of the first institutions last year that demanded legislative regulation of so-called LGBT propaganda. So there are huge, very influential and rich actors against us. And in this situation, it's difficult to operate, but we still try to be as smart and as strategic as possible. We try to have dialogue with different groups of society. We try to build the alliances with other minorities, with other vulnerable groups that are in the country. And this kind of cross-movement solidarity is very important, I think. And what we are trying to say in this situation is that if when Georgian government they basically tell the people that they are protecting children and family values, these are the two key narratives. Which I'm sure sound very familiar to my colleagues here, but we talk about Georgia, where really every third child is socially unprotected and living in hunger, and the families, we have huge labor immigration, thousands of people, especially women, are leaving the country every day because they go abroad to Central Europe to work and send money to their families. And most of every third family in Georgia, they don't have one of the parents in the family, and kids are growing up without the parents. And in this situation where we really struggle with the poverty and unemployment and children's rights in many regards, they try to persuade the people that LGBTQI people are the enemy and they are damaging the society, which is of course totally crazy. And also a very worrying trend is that a lot of the LGBTQI community members and transgender people, they are fleeing the country. Last few years has been very difficult for us because people are leaving because of the high levels of homophobia and transphobia, but also at the same time poverty and unemployment, and they are migrating to European Union countries. We even had several governments arrive and immigration offices arrive to Georgia and ask what is going on, because there are so many Georgian queer people going to Belgium, to Germany, to different countries because the life is so unbearable right now. But we part of the activists and community, of course, we are staying here and we are trying to keep up the fight. And also, I'm sure we will have a chance to talk about the specific strategies around elections and political processes, because it is important that the community, that the young people who are so bright believe that we can make the change, that we can actually change things in this country. And this is what we are trying to work with right now.
Thank you, Mariam. I was completely unaware of the fleeing of members to other parts of Europe, and really surprising to hear that other governments are actually asking questions about this, which clearly is a huge problem. But yeah, we'll talk a little bit more about some of these tactics that the movement is utilizing. Özgür, I'm gonna come to Turkey. So unfortunately, we saw President Erdogan elected to another term back in 2023. And with his recent re-election has come continued attacks on the LGBTIQ communities, including the introduction of a possible constitutional amendment. Can you briefly describe what his proposed amendment would do and how it would impact LGBTIQ communities' civil and political rights?
Of course. So I would like to tell you my day in the second round of elections, because I think it was important. I voted in Ankara, and then me and my friends went to Istanbul because we were supposed to attend to the trial for the LGBTI students in Boğaziçi University, because they were in trial because they have organized a pride march in their university. And I would like to emphasize this because in recent couple of years in Turkey, hundreds of activists got detained in those pride marches, and what happens to them is not just they are putting into the trials. If they are students, and most of them are, they are losing their scholarships. They are getting fired from their dormitories without even an investigation. So these are all the determination techniques the government is using. So we voted, and then we went to Istanbul. It was the election day. We were walking in the streets, and then we have witnessed a lot of supporters of Erdogan. They were attacking the queer community verbally, and then, like everyone else, we started watching television, and then we see the results. Erdogan, again, as usual, had his speech, annual victory speech. And we got really surprised because after the election, in his very first speech, he just targeted one community, LGBTIQ community. He said that they're gonna fight for their family values. That's why I would like to give this like a background information on that. As ÜniKuir, we have been following the parliament and the elections with an amazing team. And what we have seen there is, before the elections, so Erdogan is really famous with his like rallies, his television programs, and he had all of these like 139 times before the elections. And out of this number, 57 times he demonized, targeted, and used hateful discourse against LGBTIQ community in Turkey. And I really want to give some examples about that. That's how we can understand. He's saying that we see deviant movements as a threat to our values and culture, and we are determined to fight them. This is one example. Another example is he's saying that we will fight against deviant movements that are contrary to the common values of humanity until the end. So that's kind of a discourse we have witnessed. And think about it. If the president is talking like this, what happens to the rest of the ruling government? Everybody was talking about LGBTIs before the elections, except the opposition, unfortunately. At that time, the main leader was Kemal Kılıçdaroğlu. He had like 91 rallies, public meetings, and out of this number, he never spoken about LGBTIs at all. So that, I believe, like summarizes the environment we have seen, the atmosphere before the elections. And what we also have witnessed is it's not just about the leaders talking about LGBTIs. Historically in Turkey, we never had seen an anti-LGBTI movement. We never had seen this criminalization of homosexuality in our constitution. And what we have observed is we now are facing with an anti-LGBTI movement in Turkey supported directly from Erdogan because they have formed a coalition. Of course, you wouldn't like surprise with the name, the Family Coalition, and there you can see it's like a freak show there. Everybody is there, Islamics, nationalists, and but what we see is, especially as for the institutions in this Family Coalition, they are very very close and linked to the Erdogan's family. And I also remember one time, again, I was watching television and Erdogan was welcoming the president of Hungary, and he thanked him and he said that we learned a lot from you and we know it. And it's really upsetting to see a lot of similarities between our friends now here. But yes, they are really working together for the anti-LGBTI movement, and there is something we have to learn from this. And as for the constitutional amendment, I think it was one of the main instruments they have used. And you can ask why they have chosen this way. They had to do this because if Erdogan wants to re-elect for his third term, he had to change the constitution. That's why they have presented this constitutional amendment. And what they have proposed is it's about the definition of family. And I have to start with Turkish is ungendered. So that's why in our constitution, the family is defined as composition of two people, rather than saying it's between man and woman. But it's not because we were so progressive. It was just because Turkish is ungendered. And we don't have the marriage equality, And also, of course, it's something that we defend the marriage equality, but it's not that we now are worrying about it. The reason we are really worried about the constitutional amendment is they are also proposing one other thing, adding a sentence saying that protection of family from deviant movements. So that's the amendment we worry the most right now. And maybe just as for what will happen if they pass this amendment, I think they're also saying this now. They want to shut down the LGBT associations at the end. Even now, we as a civil society, we do not have the power to do the crowdfunding. We do not have the power to do the giving scholarships because all of them are under control and we don't have the permissions for them. So at the end, unfortunately, we could even see the shutting down of all LGBT associations in the country. And a lot of people is asking, so do you think still they can do that after the local elections? And just today, I've seen Erdogan saying again about a whole new constitution because he needs that and he wants to be in the power.
Thank you for those perspectives on Turkey. I think it's very evident that utilizing anti-LGBTIQ amendment is not just a way to limit the movement, but also a way to consolidate power for Erdogan. And this correlation that you drew, I think, is really important. That attacks on anti-LGBT or attacks on LGBTIQ plus movements is often the first of what will then be many additional attacks on other fundamental freedoms and the consolidation of power under specific leaders. So I'd like to go back to Vlad. You spoke briefly about the fact that Romania shares borders with countries such as Hungary and Bulgaria that have really stood out in the region in regards to their draconian laws against LGBTIQ communities. And you've already talked a little bit about how some of these narratives are seeping into Romania. So I'm curious about how these narratives if they will have any implications on the parliamentary elections in December.
Yes. So basically, for the past years, even decade, let's say, in Romania, was this consolidation of a public discourse within the political elites that the big fight of our century, let's say, is not about left and right, but it's about sovereignists versus globalists. In the understanding sovereignists as the ones that have a more nationalist type of vision, including the vision of Donald Trump, for example, or Viktor Orban in Hungary, or the peace government, which was until recently in power in Poland, and so on, versus the globalists, internationalists. You can call them anything you want, and they are trying basically to destroy humankind, destroy the way we understand nation states, destroy what we mean by men and women. And LGBTI rights are at the forefront of this globalist movement trying to colonize basically countries in the whole world. So this is the main type of discourse which is being proposed, and which we can identify not only in Romania but in countries like Bulgaria, Croatia, Hungary, Poland, and the United States. And for example, we see this the topic of the Istanbul Convention, which is a treaty adopted by Council of Europe countries in Istanbul, which focuses on violence against women, and which has been rejected by the Constitutional Court of Bulgaria. In Croatia, there were protests in the street against it. Hungary withdrew from it. Poland withdrew from it. So we're seeing at the regional level this sort of connections, and these connections are oftentimes also consolidated by American actors such as Alliance Defending Freedom, which I talked about earlier, and Liberty Counsel, two of the large foundations from the US that are connected to the religious right over there, which are exporting their ideology of hate within Eastern Europe using all sorts of tactics. For example, issues that arise in the United States, such as bathroom ban bills, for example, for trans people, gender affirming care, drag queens, book banning, and so on. All of these issues do get imported and do get developed at the local level in all of these countries. And oftentimes, trans rights are the first line of attack, and trans people are the target of these types of attacks. And some of the other tactics include taking a small news from the United States or from Western Europe, importing it. Like, for example, I don't know, a trans woman trying to access the services of a bathhouse or something like that, which after that develops into a national news in Romania, and it's presented as, and this is not my saying, it's a saying from a Polish politician, Ebola from Brussels. So basically having this type of colonization and this sort of disease, let's say, from imposed by Brussels, by international elites, and so on. And this is being done, these types of narratives are being done through media, for example, in the sense that media freedom in Romania is restricted because there is a consolidation of the owners of large media corporations and outlets. So basically, we cannot get out our message, but these other messages are being constantly pumped into, and they're being promoted. Also, the Orthodox Church, as Mariami was saying, in Romania, the Orthodox Church is extremely strong as well. And we have seen in the past, for example, visits of the Patriarch of Romania to Moscow and visits of the Patriarch of Russia to Bucharest. So there used to be, before the Ukrainian war, also this type of theological diplomacy and religious diplomacy which was taking place. Of course, the World Congress of Families, which is a platform that reunites both Russian entities, Catholic entities, American right-wing and evangelicals, and so on. And finally, one of the tools that are being used in Eastern Europe concerned using referenda as a tool to attack LGBT rights. And we see that in 2013, we've had a referendum to ban gay marriages in Croatia, another referendum in Slovakia in 2015, and a referendum in Romania in 2018. The Romanian referendum failed due to low participation and due to the mobilization of the LGBTI movement in asking people to boycott the vote. We've seen a recent referendum on the occasion of the recent elections in Hungary, which also failed due to a boycott. But nevertheless, these tools are being used. And in Romania, after the 2018 referendum, we have seen these conservative groups not stopping their work, and they're continuing to do this work by proposing in 2020 an anti-trans bill, which was passed by the parliament and was eventually deemed unconstitutional by the Constitutional Court, but nevertheless, it was passed by the parliament. Also in 2021 and 2022, we've seen a series of so-called anti-homosexual propaganda bills being proposed in the parliament that are now sitting in the parliament, and we don't know what's happening. And one of these anti-propaganda bills was even proposed by the Hungarian party in Romania, which is a minority party, which declared openly that they basically copied and pasted the similar bill from Hungary that they really enjoyed. And also most of the Hungarian voters in Romania, which are around 7-8%, they vote in the Hungarian elections as well. And most of them, 90% of them, vote with Viktor Orban. So you see a reshuffling of the political landscape in Romania as well, with Hungarian parties also aligning in line with the likes of Viktor Orban. So we have this sort of environment in which all sorts of groups of interests at the global level or regional level, from the United States, from Hungary, from Russia, that are coming in, and they are basically forging alliances with local indigenous groups in order to promote their agenda, to get votes. Now we also have the extreme right-wing party Alliance for Unity of Romanians, which is an extremely strong party and is expected to gain probably triple their seats in the parliament with the upcoming elections. But this sort of coalition building that is happening between international movements, conservative movements, and local indigenous movements are really affecting the politics in our countries. And we see this exchange of tactics and strategies that exist. And on top of that, we're talking about a lot of resources which are being employed and used in order to impose this worldview, to stop progress, to stop women's rights, to stop LGBTI rights, minority rights, and so on.
Thank you, Vlad. It's interesting to see that it's not just narratives that are seeping across borders, but these coalitions, you're absolutely right, are extremely powerful, extremely well-resourced, and are being very difficult to match when it comes to their ability to sway opinions and votes. Mariami, I know that you're also seeing similar attacks in Georgia. But despite that, I think the Georgia movement remains very vibrant and resilient. So can you speak to how Tbilisi Pride is engaging around the upcoming elections and supporting LGBTIQ communities to participate?
Thank you for the question. First of all, so many things from what Vlad discussed resonates with me and with Georgian context, and that's I'm once again reassured that the things and the attacks on LGBTQI rights are so global and so coordinated. I won't talk more about the challenges and attacks. I think I described most of it in detail, but despite the challenges we face, LGBTQI movement in Georgia, including Tbilisi Pride, continues to stand strong and resilient. In the lead up to the elections, Tbilisi Pride is actively engaging with the community to ensure that their voices are heard and their rights are protected. We are organizing voter education education initiatives, providing resources on how to navigate the electoral processes, and just fostering a sense of empowerment among LGBTQI individuals to participate in the democratic processes. For 2024, we have elections. We have 7 months left, and we have a specific project directed on pre-election campaigning. And our main objective this year is to drive LGBTQI people and young people in general and our allies to the polls, and also at the same time to enhance EU and international awareness and support for LGBTQI rights issues in Georgia. And to achieve this objectives, of course, we have number of activities plans, but one of the key ones is our campaign, which we called Vote Out the Homophobe, which we plan to carry out very actively with different online and offline activities of this campaign. We will have political schools for LGBTQI people, advocacy meetings, discussions, and work with the EU structures, with EU Commission and other EU bodies as well. And we will do our best through creative campaigning and through advocacy work to make sure that LGBTQI voices are heard during the election process, but we especially see the opportunity within young people. Because what we saw last year during the March protest I mentioned, which was one of the key events in the modern history of Georgia, was that it was because of the young people and so-called Gen Z who showed up, and thousands of them who were like main power in this fight, which led to the victory. And this was the very first instance when we saw that during the last, a decade, that young people entered somehow the politics, the field of politics, and they also kind of saw that they can have a say in politics. But at the same time, we see that they only get engaged when it's a very critical final moment, but they are not as interested in the elections and voting. So this is the area that we need to improve, and Tbilisi Pride is planning to work with queer people and young people to make sure, because I think that this is one of the few opportunities that we have to somehow secure democratic and European elections and future for Georgia.
Thank you, Mariami. And kudos to Tbilisi Pride in getting people out to vote and seeing the importance of the elections coming up. My last country-specific question will go back to Turkey. Özgür, you talked a bit about this correlation between democratic backsliding and the constitutional amendment and President Erdogan's attempts to consolidate more power by amending the constitution frequently. Can you talk about how the LGBTIQ movement is fighting back and navigating such complexities in such a limited civic space?
Yeah, so coming back to the constitutional amendments, I've given some examples of how they are gonna use this amendment in regarding the anti-LGBTI rhetoric. But it's not just about the rights of LGBTI people. It's also about democracy. It's about right to protest. It's about right to be organized, like forming civil society. So, I would like to give an example. An observer of political media could easily assume that, given the still ongoing crisis within the judiciary, and what happened there is Court of Cassation rejected the Constitutional Court decisions regarding the release of the member of the parliament, Can Atalay. So a lot of people thought that then the amendment has been temporarily suspended, and also after the local elections, people thought like this. But however, we wish to convey that this development brings us no sense of reassurance. So they will again work on this constitutional amendment. It won't be just about the rights of LGBTI people. It will be about all democracy, but they will present this as an anti-LGBTI amendment. And also, what happens to us, how we fight back. In this constitutional amendment process, I would like to give some examples of the deterrence methods the government is using and how we are responding to that. So let's start with the anti-LGBTI movement. I mentioned about that. So they're organizing these marches, doing press reliefs in every state of Turkey. And what we do is, whenever they do these family marches, and one time they have done it in Istanbul, we hold the live gathering online in some other parts of the country. So it's a response. And this response is not based on hate. And another method they are using is judicial harassment. So what they do is they are putting all the LGBT actors to trials for a lot of reasons, organizing the pride marches, being linked to some terrorist groups, every kind of thing that you can imagine. And what we do there is then, okay, so we are trying to show how they are proposing their arguments in the court because it's nonsense. So we are doing campaigns over it. We are making sure that people will see how such silly arguments are being used in those trials. Another thing they do is they are harassing the society organizations, LGBT rights organizations. They are also using the ministries to put some silly bans, like they are banning all the rainbows in every t-shirt, you can think about it, in every material, they have banned the rainbow. So what we have done is we have printed zillions of stickers, rainbow stickers, so people could just use them. So these are some techniques that we use. And also what we think is youth is the key for the change because people are asking how that happened in the local elections. And I'm always saying that the youth is coming up. In every elections, millions of new voters, so I'm talking about the young people, are voting for the first time. And what we see now is there is a strange trend in Turkey. If you're against Erdogan, you have to be moderate. You have to support human rights. You have to support women's rights. And you even have to support LGBT rights. It doesn't mean that they really understand it, but it's some advantages. Of course, we have talked a lot about the disadvantages of being polarized, but there are some advantages as well. Now we can reach out to the half of the country because they know how it's being oppressed by the government. So it's not just about LGBT rights, it's about the democracy we defend. And we think that youth could be the change youth could be the key for the change.
Thank you for those reflections. I think it's a really important point that, again, this isn't just an LGBTIQ specific issue, but that it impacts a majority of citizens, and that people need to be paying attention. I also appreciate the example of very simple forms of resistance through printing rainbow stickers. I wear a rainbow pin very proudly everywhere I go, and I think it's a really interesting way to show resistance in a very simple but effective way. So we're going to jump to our very last question, and we'll try to keep it brief. But acknowledging that both Georgia and Turkey are European Union candidates and Romania is a European Union member, it'd be great to get just really brief reflections on the upcoming parliamentary elections in June. Is there a hope that the European Union will remain a stalwart for LGBTIQ rights, or are there concerns that the EU is susceptible to the nationalism and populism that is increasing in many parts of Europe? Vlad, we'll start with you.
Yes, so I was actually checking the political polls for the European elections, and if we're looking at the predictions for the upcoming June 9th elections, around 23% of MEPs, member of the European Parliament, will be part of the two conservative, extreme right-wing groups, Identity and Democracy, and the European Conservative and Reformist Group. So 23% of the European Parliament is expected to be populated with extreme right-wingers in the upcoming elections. Of course, we have to watch this sort of increase in countries like Italy, where we see an attack on lesbian women and especially their families. But also we have to pay close attention to the fact that in Netherlands or France, these extreme right-wing parties have co-opted LGBT leaders, and they do have LGBT people that are on their lists and that are promoting their agenda. So it's important to also look at the types of differences that exist and the ways in which these extreme right-wing parties and conservative movements are really trying to gain voters, and what the types of issues they're addressing, and how do we ourselves are able to address topics and disappointments of disenfranchised young people. For example, yesterday a poll came out about how Romanian young voters will vote in the upcoming elections, and the highest percentage of 20% plus was towards Alliance for Unity of Romanians, which is the extreme right-wing party. So we have to ask ourselves these questions. The European project and the way we put forward and the way we talk about the issues that are of interest for us, and how, because this influences policies at the European level, this can influence at the national level even the composition of European courts, of the European Court of Human Rights, of the Court of Justice of the European Union, and so on. And we have to see also how Brussels reacts to certain issues. For example, in the year 2018, Romania was sentenced at the European Court of the Court of Justice of the European Union for failing to recognize a same-sex couple. And the European Commission was supposed to begin infringement procedures against Romania on the issue of freedom of movement in the Coman versus Romania case, and this never happened. And we're witnessing this rise in Euroscepticism. And the question is, how do we react? And also, we have to inform citizens about what the limits of power of the European Union are, because we're talking about all sorts of areas in which the European Union does not have any sort of power to change something. The power lays in the national government. But oftentimes these issues get intertwined and intermixed because it's more advantageous to attack this invisible Europe, let's say European Union, this Ebola from Brussels, as I was saying earlier. So it's our duty also to inform the citizens about what the European project is and what the European Union means, and the benefits in terms of reducing disparities, economic disparities, in terms of investing in all sorts of infrastructure projects and so on. We must defend the European project because this is a time when we have to defend it. And in this way, we also are joining hands with ILGA Europe at the European level. ILGA Europe released their campaign, Come Out for EU, which basically is a pledge asking from all of the candidates to the European Parliament to sign this pledge towards LGBTI rights. We already have 200 candidates that have signed from everywhere in Europe. We are hoping that in Romania, a lot of candidates will also sign this pledge. And this represents also the basis for a future European Parliament. And for example, we have within the European Parliament the LGBTI caucus, which is called the LGBTI intergroup. And it's extremely important to look at this group as an important tool in order to advance our agenda. Also look at European parties such as the Socialist Party, the European People's Party, who have their own LGBTI wings within their parties. And this is the types of avenues and dialogues that we can initiate. And many times European level parties can exert some sort of pressure on national parties in order to shift the national policies when it comes to LGBTI rights, because this is not about colonization. This is not about imposing something on another country, but it's about the shared values that we have as members of the European Union. And these shared values are about human rights, about freedom, about liberty, about dignity for all, and minority protections in the end. So we must defend the European project, of course, which can be reformed and should be reformed at different levels, but we must defend it, we must inform citizens, and also we must make sure that the European project does not exclude LGBTI people.
Thanks, Vlad. And last but not least, Özgür.
Yeah, and we said that Turkey is the candidate for EU, and that's right. But I have to say that Turkey has applied to become a EU member at 1987, so it has been more than 35 years now. And now what we see as the LGBTI community, human rights community, is not talking about the rights, about how we can do all the necessities for EU accession processes. It's more about a talk on the negotiation between Turkey and EU.
Thank you for that insight. That is the end of our episode. I want to thank Mariami, Özgür, and Vlad for taking the time to share their insights on the 2024 Election Watch podcast series. And I also want to thank our listeners. If you enjoyed this episode, keep an eye out for additional episodes in this series highlighting activists and leaders from other parts of the world. Thank you again, and together for better LGBTIQ lives outright.